Thank you for being here, Michele. Michele is the Executive Director of the National Basketball Players Association, NBPA. Terrific to have you here.
It's great to be here.
And I want to start from where you come from. You grew up in the projects, one of 5 kids. You went to some great schools, high school, and then to Wesleyan and to Berkeley Bolt. What is it today that you do that harks back to your roots?
I mean, there's a familiarity that I certainly feel I have with not all, but many of the players that I work for. Many of them come from backgrounds similar to mine. Many of them come from families similar to mine. And so there's at least that level of common ground that I have, and in many ways, there's no strangeness in our relationship. They're like, oh, I would say older brothers, but that would be ridiculous. They're clearly like grandsons. But they're men whose experiences I can almost immediately relate to, because while it was 50 years ago, it was very much like what many of these young guys had to contend with. So I don't claim that you have to be from a poor background to be able to relate to the players, but it certainly hasn't hurt.
How did your role as a public defender and a trial lawyer, how does that play into what you do now? What kind of a tool or a resource did that provide you?
It's odd. A public defender is perceived of by his or her clients as a lawyer that can't get a real job. You're not someone that the client has selected. You've been selected by the system. And so there's a presumption of incompetence and a need to essentially prove yourself to the clients. You can't walk in with any credibility. You have to do very well. And at the end of the day, my goal was always to make sure that the client felt himself or herself to have been blessed by my having been appointed. Oddly enough, those lessons have been useful in my current position, in that the circumstances surrounding my predecessor's departure were not positive. And there was a great deal of cynicism about whether or not a new executive director would indeed appreciate that he or she was not there to do anything except to pursue the best interest of the players. And so I spent a lot of time, having to establish credibility and allow the players to appreciate that I really, really was looking out for their best interests and not mine. And it did remind me a great deal of my days as a public defender, again, having to have them understand that I understood who I worked for.
This is a union, but it's not a union that you intuitively think of in terms of typical workers. I mean, these are millionaires and billionaires on both sides of the,
Sure.
of the table. Does that in any way change the dynamics of the negotiation? The nature of the players, if you will?
You're right, it's not a typical union in that both the management and the players are creating this product that makes them just like any other employee-employee relationship. But what I think is different is there's an appreciation of the business as something that the owners have a stake in, and certainly the players do. My players aren't carpenters. The only thing my players can do, that's not true, and if I say that they'll kill me, but they are there to play basketball. They're invested in the business of basketball in ways that arguably workers at other unions are not. And so there's an ability to form an actual partnership because the interests are so aligned. I'm not so certain that's necessarily the case in other unions. For many employees, if I can't work here, presumably I can work someplace else. My players don't have a whole lot of choices. And so we appreciate, or they appreciate, that there is a necessity for us to make this thing work. If we, that is the players and the owners, are going to be able to be successful. If the game is not successful, everybody is hungry. I don't know that affinity is as strong among other unions as it necessarily has to be in the NBPA.
And I'll ask just one follow-up question, if you don't mind. Are you negotiating just with the owners, or are you negotiating also with the public?
Oh, God. And the agents, and the family members, and financial advisors. It would be so much easier if the only people I had to worry about were owners. And the league. I mean, the league is an entity unto itself. So there are lots of stakeholders that I had to be mindful of and be respectful of and hear from and talk to. It's sort of like three-dimensional chess in many ways, but it's not too terribly different from what I used to do before I had this job. I mean, I was doing, complex commercial cases where I had to deal with unions. I had to, because I represented Fortune 100 companies. I had to deal with regulators. I had to deal with stockholders. I had to deal with a board. So, no, it's not a one-on-one negotiation. It's a multifaceted negotiation.
When you have that, the narrative of what you're doing is playing out, unlike most corporations, in the public. It's on the business page, the sports page, the media, television, social media. How do you contain your audience, your owner audience, your players, their attorneys, the people that have stakeholders? How do you, I don't want to say control them, but contain the narrative so you can present the narrative? How do you manage, I used to say this, it's like managing a cacophony of each person has their own voice, and somehow you've got to have a voice that cuts through it. How do you do that?
What we did was make sure everybody had been heard. I mean, one of the things I think I observed about prior negotiations was that, and for whatever reason, and I try not to be critical of my predecessor, but for whatever reason, he didn't engage other interested stakeholders in the process. And therefore, everyone created their own narrative, and there were all sorts of things swirling around. What I tried to do, because I frankly wanted to make sure our negotiations were not done in the media, was to hear everybody out, give people as much information that I could about where we thought we were going to try to steer the negotiation, and promise to stay sort of in touch. And as long as I did that and people felt as if they were being heard and that their positions were being considered, even if not adopted, I discovered people were willing to shut up and let me do my job. It worked out.
In preparing for negotiations, people have commented and they've used the word comity between you and Adam Silver as something that seems to have been cultivated and rather deliberately achieved as part of the process. How do you think about what you need to be negotiating towards in preparing what the issues? I mean, do you think about the other side beyond yourself? So is it a person-to-person thing? Is it an issue piece?
And again, this harkens back to my work before I got this position. I mean, as a trial lawyer, and as a trial lawyer, it would always, I thought, behooved me to respect the other side's position, understand the strengths of their case and the weaknesses of their case, as well as my own. And so I always, as a litigator, tried to understand where the other side was coming from. I also discovered that it was never useful to go into these relationships with one's hands balled up. I didn't have to agree with you, but I didn't have to disrespect you. And so what I wanted to do, and the good news was I didn't know Adam, he didn't know me, we didn't have any baggage, was to start the relationship out by saying, look, this is how I roll. I don't have anything other than an interest in resolving these things to our mutual clients' benefits. You have to give a little, I have to give a little. But let's just do this. Let's be respectful of our constituencies, because it was very important to me that the players felt as if they were being respected. And let's not lie to each other. Let's agree when we can and disagree when we can, but let's not engage in any falsehoods. Whether or not that was something that could have been achieved had I known him and he knew me and we had baggage and we had beefs, I doubt it. So we were lucky in that we didn't know each other. I actually think that my newness to the sport was an advantage.
more than the negotiation, you're the head of a business enterprise, NBPA. And so it's in business. It's in business for the benefit of its clients, constituents. It's in business to make money and be successful. This may be a challenging question, but I had a really discomfort with my own league and with the other owners and with NBPA, the idea that an owner or a executive in one of the teams is in the best place to help these young players at 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. I'm in the best place. I have the skills, the talents, and the resources. But the league and the NBPA says, no, I can't help them. To the point of, if you get them a subscription to Wired magazine, you've violated the rules. And I've talked to players, and they say, it's ridiculous. I've talked to owners and say it's ridiculous, but no one has been able to figure out how the best people could help the best people.
Believe me, if I were a player and had the money that some of our players had, and I had access to owners like yourself who have been successful in business, I can't think of anyone else I'd like to sit down and talk to. And I've heard from my players, look, we've got these relationships, why can't we exploit them? I absolutely get it. And we really are trying to figure out a way to work this out. At least I am, and I think to his credit, Adam is as well. I mean, the problem we have are these conflict issues. If we can figure out a way to do that, I think it's certainly in my players' best interest. Because again, I get it. We just haven't figured it out. It has not been a priority, to be honest with you. It should be given more attention because it's not as if this issue doesn't come up more and more. I'm actually pleased that the players appreciate the value of these resources, and I hate to call you that, that are available to them. It's on the list.
I'll ask maybe one last question, and I hope you won't mind this. It's reported that when you were a finalist for this position, as the discussions went on, you said, well, there's this elephant in the room. I know you know I'm a woman. But there are many bones littered across my pathway of men who I overcame along my way, i.e. rest assured. Why did you think you had to bring that up?
Because it was so obvious. I mean, when I was interviewing for the job, and I had several mini interviews with players and then did some presentations in front of the group, no one mentioned the fact that I was a girl, right? And I said, come on. And the good news is that their lawyers or whomever had advised them that it was probably that it wasn't unlawful to breach it, but it was clear. I mean, I was waiting for it, and it never happened. And there was no way in the world I was going to, and this was at the time I was addressing the entire board of player reps. I was not going to walk out of that room without having them hear from me about what that should or should not be in terms of things that had to be what we worried about. I know I didn't have to, but there was no way in the world I wouldn't. And my imagination, I'm sure, but I think I felt and heard a collective sigh of relief when I said it. Because of course they wanted to know, is she up to it? Fair
well,
question.
Michele Roberts, I think you are. Thank you very much for being with us here at UCLA Anderson.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for being part of a tremendous tradition and a great sport.
I love it.